Good afternoon. Sound check on Zoom. How we doing? Okay. All right. And those of you on Zoom, would you please mute if you haven't been asked to speak? So welcome everybody to our regularly scheduled meeting. It's a special day with Fournier here. We'll be introducing him in a little bit. But thanks for everybody coming in. First order of business is to declare a quorum, and I think we have.
You have one.
We have one with
You have
Peter.
7 with.
Yeah, so we are good to go if we can declare that, please. Secretary's report to approve the minutes. Judy is not able to be with us today. We circulated the minutes. Were there any comments or edits to those? If not, may I have a motion to approve this?
So moved.
So moved by Ken Sheelan. Second. And second by Clark. Treasurer's report, Clark. What do you have?
Our Seacoast account is up to $2,570.49, as opposed to $2,400. Report last week.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. With that said, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Bob Fournier. He's known to everybody, his long service to the city. I will add a personal note here. When I reach out to city staff or chartered officials, I would say Bob has been the most accessible individual on staff. I really appreciate that. Try not to bug you too much, but on a couple matters, we've become long-term pen pals.
Sure.
Bob, you've been with this city, how many years?
20 years now this year.
20 years.
Well, as city attorney.
City attorney, okay. And I think everybody knows that Bob is going to be retiring in February or March.
Somewhere in there.
Somewhere.
The date isn't exact yet.
Yeah. And I've told him that we have committee seats available on DSCA. He's looking for something. So I think we'd like to kind of jump right into this. I told Bob that our MO is we have our guest speak for 20-25 minutes, and then we turn it over for questions. And our protocol on questions is board members first, and then member reps, and then depending on time and my mood, we may recognize some other guests. So I think Bob and I, some of the most topical things from a DSCA standpoint is noise ordinance, where things stand with that. Of course, the transition in place as we retire. But I'd, in a way, like to give you some leeway to speak about, things you think are important. Of course, first and foremost, I think is the noise matter. We have identified new outdoor eating establishments coming, 3 or 4. Some are really high end. Bandito's one that Bob and I have talked about. So there was a time to get something on noise in place. It's right sooner. So with that said, let me turn on the video here, and then how are we working on sound? Let's do obviously. There we go. Oh, there we go. Bob is in the bottom right for those of you on Zoom. So take it away.
All right. Put my phone out here, not because I'm expecting a call, but if you said 20 minutes, I just want to make sure I don't ramble on for too long here. You know, when you first asked me, David, and thank you for the introduction, by the way, come and talk about the noise ordinance, or sometimes it's actually called the sound ordinance. It's a little probably less pejorative, but I was a little bit dubious because this has certainly been one of the more challenging issues that I've had to deal with in the past 20 years, just because the ordinance is antiquated, I think, and especially the section that deals with the maximum decibel limits on a sound. And I guess really for about the first 10 years, there wasn't too much discussion on it, but about 10 years ago, it came up for the first time, and lots of unresolved issues, because my recollection there is that it sort of devolved into an argument among people who thought that it would be better to promote entertainment downtown and actually raise decibel limits that were there, and those that thought they ought to be lower, which wasn't what I set out to do in the beginning at all. It was to simply clarify and revise some of the organizational structure, the provisions in it, so that it would be easier to enforce, because the police department has historically been the enforcing agency, and they have repeatedly asked for simplification or clarification, and I think justifiably so. So more recently, though, I think it's been difficult simply because of the number of issues in there that have to be addressed. And it's a real challenge, you know, when you have even sometimes one hard issue to address, and if you have a whole list of them, it just makes it more difficult. So that, I think, has been, but the last time this was discussed was back in February of this year, and I think there was significant progress made. And the discussion then turned about four components. I suggested or recommended to the commission, which was accepted, to break what needed to be done down into 4 different ordinances, and 2 of those have been done. The first one was to take the sound emanating from motor vehicles that was in the city code, put it back. Florida statutes were amended now so that we could go back and let the police department enforce the statutes rather than the ordinance when it came to sound from motor vehicles, which they wanted to do. So that's out of the way. The second one was to transfer enforcement jurisdiction from the county court judge to a special magistrate appointed by the city, the special magistrate that does the code compliance hearings. That has been done, but it's not fully implemented, and unfortunately it's going to take longer to implement for reasons I hope I can get into than we thought originally. But I want to talk today about some of that and some of the reasons why we thought that was a positive thing to do. And then talk a little bit about the lack of clarity, or I guess it's not so much clarity, it is the organizational structure of how the section of the code that regulates decibel limits is set up. And that's what I'm hoping to clarify, and then talk briefly about the use of the plainly audible standard, which is something that has gotten a lot of play lately anyway in conversation. So that's sort of where I see this going. And so first of all, on the enforcement jurisdiction, actually, I think it was intended that jurisdiction be transferred to the special magistrate years ago, because there was a provision in the city code, when you look at the jurisdiction of the special magistrate, it said the magistrate has jurisdiction over the sound ordinance. But the provisions in the sound ordinance itself all said that the violations went to the county court. So we finally got that resolved, and I think that's a good thing. And the first reason for that is because of the fines. Initially, for a long time, they're higher now, and I can explain that, but the fine for an uncontested first violation was only $100. And, you know, I think a lot of people, if you have a business that's an entertainment venue and they can afford to just pay an extra $100 a night for violating and voluntarily pay the fine, it's not really a strong incentive to comply. And so I think there was general agreement that the fines should be increased. And there's actually 2 sets of fines that come into play here. There's the set that if the violation is contested and it goes to a hearing, there's a fine that can be greater than if someone voluntarily pays it and doesn't. In other words, by statute, we're required to incentivize not contesting the violation and paying a lower fine in that event. So just to start out with, the maximum fine that a county court judge can impose on anyone is $500. And that's the maximum across the board fine. Now, the special magistrate, by contrast, has the ability to levy fines of $250 a day for the first violation, $500 per day for the second. And even though sound violations are not per day, this is the real part that sort of made me interested in transferring the jurisdiction. is that upon a finding that the violation is irreversible or irreparable, which a sound ordinance is when you think about it, because once the sound has been heard, you can't really fix it or unring the bell. They have jurisdiction to impose a fine of $5,000 as opposed to $500. So that made it a good thing. But it actually, it gets better because there is a statute that cities in Florida with more than 50,000 people have the option or the ability to, by a supermajority vote, increase those fines. And in looking into this, I didn't remember it, although I was around back in 1999. The commission at that time adopted an ordinance to take advantage of this provision to increase those fines. And so they're increased, rather than the first fine being $250 a day, it's actually $1,000 for the first time, and then $5,000 for a repeat violation. And if upon a finding that the violation is irreparable or irreversible, they can go up as much as $15,000. Now, you know, I'm not saying that this needs to be punitive, but there have been some businesses that are just chronic violators, and I think that's a tool to be used for someone who's just consistently not in compliance. Not that there's going to be some sort of a crackdown or something like that, but at least there's some bite to the penalty, if you will, as opposed to just $100 fines. And so one of I might mention the other reason that was attractive is because, generally speaking, the code compliance violations are different. There are, you know, things like overgrown lots, weeds, trash, rubbish, or a car maybe that's inoperable in the yard or something like that. And the compliance officer has to give by statute a reasonable time to comply. And that really doesn't work in the context of the sound ordinance because the violation happens once, it's not continuing. But because of that provision that I mentioned about in the event of an irreparable or irreversible injury, the one-time fine is so much greater than you could get in county court. That's why it seemed like an attractive option. But we've had to do some implementation and change the particular form for a notice of violation that a code compliance officer would use to come up with a specialized form for a notice of violation that's just particular or peculiar to the sound ordinance only, because the corrective period for a sound ordinance violation is in a matter of minutes, not days. You know, I think probably 15 minutes. Sometimes if there's music playing, because of crowd control issues like that, in the officer's discretion, they may want to let them finish the set or something like that. So you've got to be reasonable about it, but it's certainly not going to, you know, I'm coming back in 5 days, and that just doesn't work in this context. So, and then the second reason I think that we did this is just the flexibility and the ability to make a record. You know, and I don't know if anybody's ever been in county court, but county court is sort of set up for as traffic court and DUIs and tenant evictions and small claims and that sort of thing. And there's often a waiting line of people in the room, and you're somewhat rushed sometimes, not always. Some of the judges do try to be accommodating, of course, but you can't always count on getting the time that you might need to have a hearing. It's difficult to have citizens participate or testify or what they've heard to, that sort of thing. So, but with a special magistrate, who is someone that's retained by the city commission, arrangements can be made, and if there's opposing counsel, you can get a convenient time, you can take as much as you need, you can schedule an afternoon, whatever. And the reason that's important is because these hearings, when they're appealed, and either from the county court or the special magistrate, they both get appealed to the circuit court to the same place, but thereby process called certiorari, where the appeal is just based on the record. There's no new testimony on the appeal, so it's very important that you get enough time to put all the testimony on that you need, and therefore you have a better record. So that was important. And then one thing that we did add that I think will hopefully help, I'm just going to read you this provision, is a joint and several liability provision. There was a question a lot of times on, you know, there's tenants in these businesses, there's people that are there playing the music, or managers as opposed to the owners. So we added a provision that says the individual controlling or responsible for maintaining the volume of the sound or excessive noise, the operator and or owner of the premises, that is the sound source, shall each be subject to liability for violations of this chapter, and if prosecuted jointly, each shall be jointly and severally liable for any fines imposed pursuant to this chapter. So the city could choose to go after either one for the full amount of the fine in that event. So just to give it a little more, ability to impose a stronger penalty to perhaps make some of these establishments think harder about violating it. And fortunately, I'm sure there's been some incidents out there here and there, but right now, I don't think there's anyone who's chronically violating, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but no complaints have reached me anyway, as has been the case in the past. So that's sort of the rundown on why we went to the special magistrate. We're now working, like I said, on development of new forms and working out some of the implementation issues with SPD. And I think before we can fully implement this, I think we're going to need to have the other amendments in place. The other two ordinances that I talked about, one would have been addressing the decibel limits and the other plainly audible. And initially I thought that it would be best to perhaps separate those into two different ordinances for simplicity, but in thinking about it further, and they were going to be scheduled for this fall, but I think maybe it would be better to present both together in a single ordinance. It doesn't mean the vote has to be taken. And the reason for that is they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. Some jurisdictions do plainly audible alone, and they don't have decibel limits. There's not that many, but there are some. I think St. Pete has tried that. And some out-of-state cities I've seen, and they have decibel limits, but you can have an ordinance that has both. The plainly audible limitation, I'll talk about in a minute, sometimes doesn't apply till after a certain hour in time. We've also had some issues with the noise meters, and I'm looking at, I know the kind of meter that SPD uses. There are some special meters out there now that can be used explicitly solely to measure bass sounds, the low frequency sounds. That's not specified in the code. I think that it could be. I know, one of the issues, SPD does a lot of cross training. They switch people from one position to another, and that can be very beneficial. But I think perhaps with regard to the soundish ordinance, it might be a little detrimental, because I'm trying to suggest that maybe they have a core group of officers that are very skilled on these meters, because I've heard a lot of times in talking to residents, people always compliment the officers and they say how professional they are and how pleasure they were to deal with, et cetera. But a couple of people have said, but I sense there might have been a slight lack of familiarity with the equipment, and it is difficult to operate. So I think that's something we're trying to look at and talk about too. And these, as like I said, the sound, of course, as you know, is measured in decibels, and there's A frequency, which is the mid-range sounds, the sounds that are audible to the human ear. But there's also limits in the code about the sound measured through the C sound filters, which measures both low and high frequency sounds. So we could have meters, separate meters that specialize in just that. And the type of meter, unfortunately, I'd say unfortunately, because it takes longer, has to be specified in the ordinance, because they have to know what the standard is. So we're sort of working through that right now. But before I get into the decibel limits provisions, I want to say just one thing is the First Amendment comes into play here, because I think everybody knows about freedom of speech and how you're free to express yourself, and that's protected under the First Amendment. But when it comes to, how am I doing on the time? Okay, all right. When it comes to music, music also gets First Amendment protection. So what that means is you want to have an objective standard of measurement. You see sound ordinances that say things like, if it's offensive to a person of reasonable or normal sensibilities, and that's all well and good, but that works for sounds like construction sounds, machinery, dogs barking. You can get 8 neighbors to come in and say that dog barked for 8 hours straight, and I thought I would go crazy and prove a violation, but you can't do that with music. So the one way to measure it is through decibels, because that's objective and it's either over the limit or under the limit, or the plainly audible is another, when I get to that. So when it comes to the decibel limits section of the ordinance, the problem, I think, is not so much with the decibel limits, although maybe sometime those would be looked at, and I think you'd have to hire a consultant to do that. And I've said I really want to leave those the same, but I want to come up with a different organization. The problems with the ordinance, I think there's two things that have to be addressed. The ordinance right now categorizes sound so that it regulates amplified sound as a separate category of sound. But yet amplified sound is only regulated when it comes from a source that's not within a completely enclosed building. And it's only specifically regulated after a certain time in the evening. So I've had arguments made to me that that means amplified sound is left unregulated during the daytime. And, you know, that hasn't been a problem yet, but conceivably it could be. And then there's a section that deals with impulsive source sound, which is something like an explosion or a gun going off, and we've never had a violation like that. So I question whether that needs to be in there. And then continuous source sound, which is not defined in the ordinance, which if you give it its literal meaning, of course, it means it's continuous sound. And haven't had anybody argue yet that when a live band stops playing, that means it's not continuous, but give them time, they will. So I think taking all those out and just regulating sound by the source of the sound makes more sense. So what I had recommended is you just have two categories of sound that comes from an outside source, sound that comes from an inside source. And I think that would simplify it a great deal. And then you have the hours that the sound is regulated. And very loosely, generally speaking, it would be daytime hours and nighttime hours. So I envision something that could even be reduced to a sort of a matrix where you might have whatever the daytime hours selected are, you know, whatever time the sound is to be lowered, whether it's 10, 11, midnight, 1 in the morning, whatever the commission sets it at. And then box for inside source and outside source. So it would be easy to see, and you'd avoid all this complication that you have now, which in all fairness is hard for the officers to understand. And I'm told a disproportionate share of the new officers get the night shift when most of the sound occurrences occur. So, you know, that's yet another problem. So that's what I'm looking at with the decibel levels. Now, plainly audible is something I've talked about, but plainly audible means exactly what you think it would mean. It means that sound that could be heard by an individual, an officer, using their normal hearing facilities or auditory senses at a specified distance from the source. So this is an attractive option because it's simple, straightforward, and it's easy to understand. And it also eliminates the need to use meters or sound measuring devices after a certain time. And so there are two regulatory aspects that come into play when you talk about regulating plainly audible sound. And the first one I mentioned is the distance from the source of the sound, because you have to have that in there so that the enforcement isn't arbitrary. The officers have to be the same distance away. And the hours during which you prohibit plainly audible sound. There have been some jurisdictions that tried to do it on a 24-hour basis, and I haven't found one yet that was upheld because the courts all say that's overbroad. You're prohibiting more sound than you need to accomplish the objective of the ordinance. I can explain what I mean by that in a minute. So the two primary ways to challenge a plainly audible sound regulation would be that it's vague. And if you have an ordinance that's vague, it means essentially that you don't give a person of ordinary knowledge and intelligence a fair notice of the conduct that you're prohibiting by the ordinance. So you don't understand what is you're not supposed to do. But fortunately here, and this is what has made plainly audible so attractive, a few years back, the Florida Supreme Court held that the standard was not vague. You know, vague might be, in this context, an example I used before, disturbing sound. Well, what is that? You know, how is anybody going to know? And then the second way is that the regulation is overbroad. And what I mean by that is it prohibits more sound than is going to be necessary to accomplish the purpose of the ordinance. So if you have a regulation, say that you have to sort of articulate the objective. And I think generally what I've heard, the objective would be past a certain point of time in the evening, the commission's objective in passing an ordinance like this would be to just protect the right of citizens to have quiet repose in their homes, after a certain hour. So say if you say that plainly audible sound after 8 p.m. is a violation of the ordinance, probably a viable argument can be made that most people are not in bed by 8 p.m. I know I'm not. I mean, maybe if it's in Venice, but but I don't think 8 p.m. is a reasonable time. So that's an issue the commission is going to have to grapple with, I think, is what time that sound goes down. And as I said, there's been cases where I think they tried to be too ambitious with it, and not so much an earlier time, but the jurisdictions that have tried to make plainly audible a violation, all day, they usually get into overbreadth problems. And the courts say that it's not a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction that you can impose because it's not narrowly tailored enough to confine it to accomplishing your objective. So, and then as I mentioned, plainly audible can be used alone, but I think the better way is to combine it with the decibel limits, which is why I want to do one ordinance and then bring that forward later than I had originally anticipated. I thought it would be coming forward as soon as this month, but I think now we're looking more like December, January, but it'll be coming up. But this is something I want to address, and we talked about it months ago, so we have to get it moving forward. So I think I'll stop here, and that sort of summarizes the basics of what I wanted to cover, just generally speaking, but there are a lot of challenges. I don't think I've talked about all of them, and I haven't gotten into the specifics of the particular sections, but that's probably enough for right
now. Great, just one thing I wanted to recognize, Vice Mayor has joined us, and Mayor Albert is here, so welcome. With that said, questions, Ken?
Maybe this is one of the things that you haven't dealt with yet, but what about moving violations like in automobiles?
Okay, thank you for asking that, because moving violations, of course, in the automobiles, they have a plainly audible standard for that. And it's been generally recognized that the distances imposed there, like the state statute, is 25 feet, but you could never get away with that from a stationary source sound. There's probably too much ambient sound. So the later you go, of course, in the evening, when plainly audible would click in, the lesser distance you can get away with. But one of these that was invalidated, I think it was from Mobile, Alabama, and they're commonly used. It isn't so much that you can't use them, it's just that they have to be applied correctly. I think they tried a 50-foot limit pretty much all day long, and that just was held unconstitutional because it would prohibit too many sounds that they didn't need to restrict. So you just have to be careful to get it right. And I know I've received some emails from citizens that have researched this, and as I said, it's very common. They've had a list that I checked, and I had most of the ordinances, not all of them, of cities in Florida that have done it, and there's a lot. But I'm more interested actually in knowing not so much where it's been done, but where it's been challenged, and then what the result of the challenge was, because I really don't have any interest in drafting an ordinance that would be struck down like that. So I think we should have some reasonable chance of defending it if it's challenged, and that's something that I more or less have to plan on because I think there's a high likelihood. Maybe not if we get across that this is just it's like I said, it's not intended as a crackdown. It's just intended to reform and update an antiquated ordinance, quite frankly.
Okay, Kathy?
Yeah, so does this include the pop-ups, like, for lack of a better term? Say you have someone who sets up in a corner of like the park or something like that, and they set up amplification and they just blare music. It includes that as well, right?
It should, because I think it should be any source of sound. Now, there is a section in the ordinance that I haven't mentioned that I think we're going to deal with separately that provides for an exemption from the maximum decibel limit in the event they're sponsoring a special event. Say the limit is 75 dBAs or whatever, sure. They can want to go to 90. So if they had a permit for that and it was granted, they could exceed the limit for that temporary duration of the special event. But the answer to your question is yes, okay. It is intended to apply.
Yeah, I was more concerned with those that aren't permitted.
But that would be, that just brought to mind a thought, an example of a situation where the limits might be exceeded if somebody had a permit to do it in connection with a special event. But I'm not addressing that in this ordinance, so I'm glad you brought it up, because they're going to talk about changes to the special events ordinance, and that's where that's going to be addressed.
Clark.
So, Bob, the difference between an audible sound and a decibel level, is there other characteristics of an audible sound that are irritating that can be measured other than decibels? See,
the benefit or the beauty of plainly audible from my perspective is it doesn't really even have to be annoying or irritating, it's just that you can hear it. So, and then decibels, of course, it's measurement and the tools, you have to get that right. But you can have, and I've seen many ordinances that keep the decibel levels in effect. In other words, you can say, let's say it's midnight. After midnight, a plainly audible sound and a specified distance from the source may be a violation, but you could keep the decibel limits in place. So there would be an option, enforcement-wise, to either measure the decibel levels or just say, the sound was plainly audible at whatever the specified distance is from the source.
How about bass notes? Is that an example of what you were trying to get to? When I lived on St. Armand's, Cha-Cha Coconuts played so late at night, and you didn't hear it until you laid your head on the pillow, and then the bass notes came through the ground.
Well, I have looked at definitions, and I'm gonna propose one. Now, the measurement is, that specific way to measure the bass is another issue, but to be able to, and it's kind of odd because you think that the bass measurement might be more a factor when you're talking about decibel limits, but I've seen definitions of plainly audible that incorporate the bass sound, to say if you can hear that bass component, that that's included in plainly audible. So I'm gonna try to do that, at least for discussion purposes. It can always, come out. But I think that's worthy. I've done some research on those subwoofer speakers, and that some of them, it's very funny. They advertise like you not only can hear the sound, but you can feel it. So I'm not sure what that means, but you feel the sound and hear it. I guess that it's pretty intense. Yeah.
Peter and I have experienced being in a condo at 1350 where I live on the first floor, with a bandstand practically in arm's reach outside, with the bass clearly coming through, shutting all the windows and the doors.
Oh, I've heard others talk about that as well. Yeah. But I think ultimately, if that really becomes more of a concern as time goes by, that the way to do that is to perhaps look into some sound meters that are designed purposefully to measure the bass component.
Yeah, that's not Peter.
I'm interested in the notice provision. So on a sound violation, notice is at the time it occurs. Is there a condition upon which you have to educate the person getting the notice?
Well, I mean, I think you tell them at the very least that the sound is a violation of the ordinance at the level at least that it's being played, or if it's plainly audible, I mean, it can be played for purposes of people who intend to hear it, but not everybody else. So I don't think there's a duty to instruct or something, but except that I think, any warning involves telling the person that whatever they're doing is in violation.
So it's just like our educate, encourage, enforce kind of thing.
In a way.
So you can educate the person, and then if they continue to do it, you might even encourage them to stop, and after that, just.
Well, we're looking, and this is something that's come up that we thought of, is, if you have to warn every time, and you do under the code compliance statute, you can't go back and just warn, and then they turn it down, and that's forever. So we have to find some way in the definition of repeat violation to incorporate a person that's been warned previously within the past, whatever the time period is, maybe as much as a year, maybe only 3 months or something like that. But whatever is reasonable under the circumstances, because you just don't want to build in some way that people can sort of game the system and just, like I said, voluntarily pay $100 every time or something like that.
Bob, I've got a question. Banditos. For those, this is a restaurant concept. Think of between Smokey Joe's and the Gator Club mid-block on the south side of Maine. There is a building permit working its way through the city. It's been in process over a year for an approximately 200-seat restaurant. It is a restaurant in a multi-use zone area. It has a rooftop area. My understanding is that the rooftop area there may be open until the appointed time, 11, I think it is currently. Let's talk weekdays. So at 11, the rooftop area would need to be vacated. But as I understand it, the door into the restaurant, in this case, roll-up garage doors, could remain open.
Actually, no, there was a last-minute change, and if you give me a second, I think I brought the ordinance with me, thinking that might come up. The 11 o'clock refers to the believe that's the closing time for outdoor accessory restaurants. So if you have outdoor seating at your restaurant, service is supposed to stop at 11. But there was a revised definition for nightclub, if you remember, because that was formerly tied to the type of liquor licenses the establishment had, and that wasn't really always the way these establishments were operating. In other words, you have places like Duval's now that is under the code of nightclub, which, you know, I don't think by anyone's, you go in there and you think it's a restaurant, not a nightclub. But it was added to the definition at first, and we came up with a revised definition, which I think is probably better than the first one. I worked with staff on this, and at first it said that it was going to be live entertainment only after 11, and then the conditional use would be required. We modified that, and then there was a question raised that was asked of me: could we put in the sound ordinance a regulation that required the door or the roll-up window that you're talking about to come down at a certain time? And I said, no, I really think that the sound ordinance is to regulate the generation of sound and the limits on sound, and that the use of property is a zoning regulation. But so if you want, I can read you now. It is in here in the definition of nightclub. Of course, this has to be a nightclub, which means they'd be, and it does say in here, windows and doors shall remain continuously closed after 11 p.m. other than to allow the ingress and egress of patrons. And then it goes on, and this was modified from what was originally in there. For purposes of this definition, the term live entertainment shall include but not be limited to live bands or live musicians. And the term amplified entertainment shall include but not be limited to amplified music generated by live DJs, music that is electronically produced and transmitted. And this was the part because there was discussion at the meetings that, well, it had to be live amplified music because we didn't want to make background music a violation of the ordinance. But we were able to address that by saying televised entertainment and background music shall not be considered amplified entertainment. Background music is amplified music intended as unobtrusive accompaniment to some activity such as dining or consuming alcoholic beverages. So that was the best we could do, but at least it's there, so there's some language to work with. I think that concern that, you know, it had to just be if it was only live entertainment. But to answer your question, David, that is now in the definition, so that door has to come down at that time, if it's a nightclub.
Okay. All right, it would take too much time to
Probably would.
get into the details, but of course, that's a poster child for, we've seen some of the promotional materials for their other.
Judging by the materials you showed me,
then a
potentially.
follow-on question is, so they just ask for a building permit, that doesn't have to go to the DRC process, this just gets a building permit?
The administrative approvals do go to DRC, and I think that includes the ones that go directly to building permit. So I think DRC would be considering this. I think they review everything. Have you not
I'll
been
check
able to
into
track
that.
this there?
I don't believe so.
I did ask about this recently, and nobody knew the reason why, but they said it was sort of stalled. So I don't think that, it hasn't been withdrawn, but I don't think the opening is imminent, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I use that as an example
Yeah,
of
and a good
something
one.
that could be because of its proximity to the mark, and it's in a mixed use area, and what the size of it and so forth. So,
Yeah.
David?
David?
Oh,
Yeah, hi. Yeah,
Peter Blank,
so, hi, Bob, it's Peter Blanton. I guess my question relates not to nightclubs, but sports bars that are planned in residential areas. So the nightclub definition really doesn't help. And a lot of these sports bars will be filed as a restaurant. They'll say 51% of the revenues come from food. And as you can imagine, sports bars can be loud. And a number of these sports bars plan to have roll-up walls. And I think it was a goof or a loophole in the ZTA for bars that it's silent on these roll-up walls, that those roll-up walls in effect could stay open to 2 a.m., noise from the sports bar It may not be entertainment, but you know, it's gonna be loud and that can go on to two in the morning.
No, I had to acknowledge the validity of that concern, and if it becomes a problem, I guess unfortunately somebody's gonna have to experience some loud noise that they don't wanna hear, but it can be addressed in the zoning code. I think what you might have been alluding to is the new urban mixed use, yeah, I think that's the name of it, urban mixed use future land use classification along the commercial corridors.
No, I'm talking about the ZTA for restaurants, bars, and nightclubs.
Okay,
I brought
well,
this up to the city commission. Debbie Trice raised it. She goes, I can't believe that we allowed that to go through in that manner. And she wanted to change it and then it died.
well, there's no specific definition for sports bars, but I could see bars as a separately defined term. So if there needs to be a similar provision in the future, you know, inserted into bars, I think the premise of this amendment was that nightclubs would be the venues where there would be the most noise generated after 11 p.m. and hence the requirement for the conditional use. But a bar could just be perhaps, you know, what you think of as a bar where you talk to somebody and there's not necessarily entertainment and it's quieter, and maybe nobody would object to that. But, you know, you have a fair point. There are sports bars where people congregate to watch television and they can get raucous at times, and that might be an issue. But if it is, I think it can be addressed in the context of that particular use. So I think you may have a fair point. It's just, and then it's unaddressed now, but it could be if it needs to be in the future.
Yeah, well, I think, when I brought this up, the development services people said, okay, well, yeah, that'll have to be covered by the updated sound ordinance. Because right now we have no protection. You
It's
can,
not going to be.
you have the roll up walls open, lots of noise till 2 in the morning.
Yeah, those are land use issues and they should be regulated in the zoning code, I think.
Yeah,
You
well,
know,
they goofed.
yeah, well, and I mean, of course, that's always a matter of opinion, but it can be debated that, you know, it's not static, that the zoning code can always be amended. They do regular amendments every year, but I think the sound ordinance has to be confined to, you know, the measurement of sound and not get into particular land uses.
Yeah, well, that's what development services said. It's, sorry, that's up to the sound ordinance.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I
One more question.
Who's the question? Jim Toll, a question, sir, as a member rep?
Yeah, Bob. So I actually sent you the question in the chat. I don't know if you had a chance to read it, but
I haven't seen it yet, Jim. Sorry.
okay. So in the before the mid 80s, you know, we had circuit court, county court, municipal courts, and then, you know, the voters of Florida amended the Constitution to eliminate the municipal courts. I think, you know, I am we call it the hearing officer in the city of Northport, but it's the same thing as what the city of Sarasota calls a special magistrate. And it just, I keep telling like the city attorney that, you know, the county court just doesn't want to do this stuff. I mean, that's what's happened. The county court says, no, we're not going to hear these kind of cases anymore. So now, yeah, the special magistrate's hearing them, I'm hearing them. At what point in time is someone going to say, wait a minute, you're violating the Florida Constitution? I mean, for code enforcement, yeah, that was a special statute. And I think there's been appellate cases that upheld, you know, both code enforcement boards and hearing officers, special magistrates to do that kind of thing. But as this expands and gets outside of what I call normal code enforcement, I mean, is there a potential problem?
No, I just think you need to be careful and aware. And I looked also, and lots of other jurisdictions have assigned sound ordinance violations to the special magistrate. And I'm actually glad you brought this up because I you know, going over these materials, I thought there is sort of a fair analogy, and not a perfect one, but a fair one to be made between the old system where they did have the municipal courts pre-1968 and this code compliance process that exists now. And I think in some ways the legislature is, like, by allowing these fines to be increased, is incentivizing local governments to refer more violations to the special magistrate in that way. And I think maybe at the end of the day, it doesn't matter so much because they both go to the same place on appeal. They both end up in circuit court. And the reason it's attractive to me is, as I stated, you get to make a better record, generally speaking, in front of the hearing officer or the special magistrate. I think you'd agree. So that made it an attractive option as well.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I think we're about out of time. I think that Peter Blanton, I think we have some new restaurant concepts or sports bar concepts in the pipeline here.
Okay, I may not have been
And
aware of
one,
this.
for example, is at the Quay. Be the first restaurant. There's a outdoor restaurant, very high end, but there could be, I'm gonna vaguely speaking, a sports bar concept. And we have, in addition to the residents there, you almost have a speaker box kind of setup, you know, canyons of tall buildings, and I don't know how that could potentially make the sound even louder because it's more boxed in. So I guess separately, the train's on the track. There's some things that could be problematic. What do we do about it in a problem we can foresee? And so that is a question I'd like to continue to work with. And everybody's maybe pointing fingers at each other between zoning and noise ordinances could end up with a mess. So.
Well, we don't need to, but
Okay.
I think that, you know, crowd noise is harder, more challenging to regulate because it's not like playing music or making sound, and it's hard to put limits on, but if it's a television set or something like that. So again, I think it's, you know, closing times and location and confining it to indoors. And I think you can have higher decibel limits inside because you can do more to mitigate sound when the source of it's inside. So if it's controlled that way, but I think that's all zoning. You know, those are conditions that are imposed when it goes through the approval process. If it's a conditional use, lots of ordinances have a sound mitigation review. And if it's deemed necessary, then it's the requirements are imposed.
Well, listen, thank you for your time. You're a busy guy, and we appreciate your words and look forward to working through on this stuff.
Yes.
And again, time-wise, what is your current thinking time-wise?
Well, I've just asked for some additional time. I have at least, so I don't know, but on this ordinance, so as far as I'm here, I want to get through this ordinance. I want to have time to do it. But I think the first of the year, I think it's conceivable we could have this at the first meeting in December, or maybe it's better to wait till after the first of the year, but right in that time frame on this ordinance. It's sort of pushed back a couple of months, but instead of only one aspect of it, I'll combine the two. So I think that would work better.
Well, you're welcome to stick around for the rest of the meeting, or
What's coming up?
Probably.
Wine at the end.
Well, yeah, wine at the.
Well, maybe I should.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Moving on to, we don't have any new business under old business. Patrick, you have some kind of exciting news and something that we've started to talk about. You want to start
Okay.
sharing on that?
Yes, I'm just here to give an update. This was a project we actually started looking into earlier this summer about how to make our website and information more easily accessible to our members and to the public. And so I had researched and found a personal AI application that allows you, it knows nothing except how to edit stuff, and you have to teach it everything. So we've been loading in documents, and so we've created a public interface. I'll kind of blow it up here a little bit. So where we are with this is we created this, we're kind of in testing, still in testing mode here, but we want to roll it out at least for our members, and especially for our member representatives, to start looking at this and seeing if this provides you with any kind of useful information. If it doesn't, then before we get into our budgeting for the next year, we'll line item it out. And so this is more of an experiment, but it's given us some very interesting insights as we go into it. So we've created two interfaces, a public interface and what we call our member interface. So the public interface essentially knows information that we put up on our public website, what's in our newsletters, et cetera. So for instance, information, so for example, if you went in there and somebody did a query, just tell me about what's going on with Martin Brown and his job. And so this is what the AI responded with. Let me see if I can mark it there. Based upon simply giving it information about our newsletters and some of the city documents. So that's the first pass. Another example would be what's happening with the downtown master plan. And so here's so again, this is based on information that we feed into it from public documents, but the fact that it can just pull it together and give you some industry insights through there. And it's set up to kind of create a dialogue because all of the answers here. So for instance, here's how it came out with this here. So the roles on what's happening with that. And then it usually ends up with a question, how would you like to continue the conversation? Now, right now, it's still relatively limited. And so for anybody who's going to be trying it out, we can internally see what's happening and from that determine, hey, that wasn't a very good answer, or that was all wrong, or we don't have that information there. So if that's important, we'll go find that information. So for instance, for our members, we don't have all of our past board minutes, but we could do something like that. Here's an example then. So like I say, from the inside, this is internally, the questions appear, and if it has certain thresholds and it doesn't give enough of the right answer, it will say, hey, I can't answer that. And then we can go back and look internally and see what information they had, what else it needs. On the member side, through a lot of effort, we have loaded it up with not only access to all the public information, but additional public information obtained from the city's website, like the entire comprehensive plan, the zoning code, and selected site plan documents from all the downtown developments in the last year or two. So this is the kind of interface member site here. Now we're trying to make sure it knows about the same documents that the public knows. So for example, so this essentially is what it's been trained on. Larger. So where you see like two little things there, that means two different personas know about this, the public persona and the member persona. But when you get down to things like site plan information, only the member persona knows about that. And so that's how searching. So for instance, here's a recent list of all the site plan filings for a variety of different, they're in. And so from that, we begin to ask it questions. What do you know about any site plans filed for North Palm Avenue? And it comes back, here's the site plan number here for 24 ASP 07, and enough information to send you on the right path to go do some preliminary stuff. And make it easier to get access to the documents on the city side, that would be even better. So that's essentially what I have here for the where we are with this. And for those member reps, we can, if you would get back in touch with me if you'd like, we can set up a separate Zoom call and can go through and give you more insights into that. Any questions from board members?
High tech outfit, no doubt.
Well, first of all, does anybody find any value in that?
Yes, yes, and the second question really from an administrative point of view, is this something you create a bot to go out and get this information?
Oh, no.
Or is this something you have to manually input all of these documents?
Well, there's a process now. The reason I selected this, it's has up here.
just thinking from an administrative point of view.
Right, well, if you take a look here on the left-hand side here, I'm not doing it live, but there's a whole variety, there's a whole series of integration. It can integrate with the Google Drive, integrate with Gmail, Outlook. And so, for instance, certain city notices coming into our DSC email can add a label to it. It will go into the sync folder and it will sync into the AI.
I was just thinking, whatever make it easy to administer.
That's the whole idea. We only have volunteers doing this.
Yeah,
But yes, so that is one key thing is the company that's doing this is every week to come up with something else. They just rolled out something last week with a whole new series of ways to do multiple folder syncs and things like that. As well as a Chrome out thing, you could have a little icon there that will automatically add it if you come across something on the website and say, oh yeah, this would be good, add it. So we'll work it out, and basically we want to find out is what information should we be capturing that our members want to know about. This is where we're going with this thing. So it looks like there's enough good information and we can make use of it, and it's reasonably valuable, then we might consider it. Otherwise, we're just trying to try it out.
Thank you. Clark, did you have a question?
I was just wondering if it had the, can you tell it to make charts? Can you tell it to make, put this in a format that is presentable as a visual, thank you.
There are ways to format and extract the data mostly in a text manner. There are access to the creative AIs that create all sorts of wonderful cute pictures, but I haven't seen the business application as you're describing there yet.
Can it do bullets? Can you have it do bullets?
There are certain formatting things that you can have it set up to do. We're working on ways that, that can go back in there on a regular basis, make quarterly extract, give us a summer report or something. But again, it's all based upon what we feed it. That's the value of it, is it only knows what we tell it.
Thank you. Moving on, city update. The one thing I wanted to report on is, as we know, Marlon is retiring. I was at city commission meeting on Monday, and there is work underway to identify an interim city manager. One internal department head has applied, so as to speak, or is raised. It's identified as a he, and that's to be considered at next Monday's city commission meeting. If this internal candidate would be approved, I guess, or
well, they were going to, the commissioners were going to interview them, interview this person.
Interviews are taking place this month. Now, parallel with that, a national search for a permanent new city manager is to be in the works, and identification of the search firms. I'm not exactly sure. I think there'll be a progress report on that.
It sounded like it was quite far in the future.
It was estimated it could be as a 6-month process.
Yeah,
4 to 6 month process. So that's where that stands. Moving on to committee status reports. Ken, what have you got?
I've got a bunch of stuff, and I'm sorry because I was gone in August and September. I was in Scotland in August, and I had a family death in September. So I'll try to make this quick. I wanted to mention grants because we all read about the state and the county cutting arts organization grants, and it's amazing what the public has done to step up to the plate. In fact, I think embracing our differences ended up with more money as a consequence of private donations to make up for the differences. But I think it's something we might be interested in getting involved with, at least with the county commission, because the way they did it was outrageous. They blindsided all of these organizations. They had their budgets developed and approved, and they were waiting for the money, and then they got smacked across the head with a 2x4. And that's wrong, absolutely wrong. So we might want to come up with some ideas that we pass along to them. Interestingly, I lunch with John Tetzlaff, or Don Thaxton last week, and we got to talking about this. And he called every one of the county commissioners and bitched at them about it and told them how outraged he was about it. So it tells me you need to talk to him and tell him what you think. So we'll come up with something next year to deal with that. A lot of the arts organizations have announced their seasons. The most impressive one, I think, is the Key Corral and the collaborative effort that they go to engage with other organizations like the Sarasota Orchestra and the Ballet and the Circus Arts Conservatory and the Venice Symphony. They have an incredible season, so I would encourage people to get tickets to any of their presentations. They're all over the county too. They're not just in Sarasota. There was a fellow who received a $10,000 commission to write a play, and it came from FST, an organization called the Recovery Project, and Terrence McNally Foundation. You may not know that Terrence McNally, a very famous and successful American playwright, lived here and died here. And his husband still lives here. He has a home here. His husband is a Broadway producer, Tom Cuddy. In fact, one of his shows is on Broadway right now, Hadestown. And he's involved with this. And it's wonderful to see private individuals get so engaged and so in such constructive ways. The Van Wezel, I went to the Purple Ribbon Committee in August and also in September. There's another one scheduled for the 10th of this month. It's really disappointing to me how little is being accomplished by that committee. And I'm beginning to hear other significant voices in the community complaining about it. The only thing that I've seen come out of it was in the September meeting, and that was a discussion about Conference Center. And I think that could be a possibility. So that's an issue that some this city staff, city administration is going to have to deal with. Is that they get almost nothing accomplished at these meetings. The committee is not engaged. They sit there and listen to a presentation and then leave. The Van Wezel did suffer some flooding damage this week. The foundation lounge was flooded. They had to take the carpeting out. Out of the carpeting itself, they squeezed 50 gallons of water. So it's very significant. The lawn had a lot of debris on it. Mary was working to get that cleaned up because they had Friday Fest this week. So they needed to have it cleaned up. But she told me one thing that was very interesting. She said the storm surge, got very close to the transformer and the chillers. And she said if they had overcome either of those devices, that would have been the end of the season. So it tells you how risky that location is. And as sea level rises and as the elevation in the Bay Park changes, and the storms that we get here get worse, that location is going to be problematic. Okay, let's see. The city staff has put together a revised ZTA for public art. I've looked it over. The fog index has gone up. And I don't see a lot of change in it, except that it talks about an art manager. It's a shame that we keep rewriting stuff and just words. That's just it was funny. But one good thing that Mary, what's her name, has done. Thanks. They've hired somebody to clean public art. And they've been doing it, and if you look at the Jack Cartledge pieces at City Hall, you'll see they look different. They're brighter green. And that's because they've got this copper verdigris thing. But they're doing it all over the city, the entire city. And it's being done by Randy Cartledge, who is the son of the guy who did all the sculptures at City Hall, and Sean Colson, who's the son of another sculptor. Both of their parents are dead now, but they're obviously knowledgeable about what they're doing and care about the things that they're doing it to. A lot of us have heard already about the Sarasota Performing Arts presentation, the public meeting on the 18th of September. The Renzo Piano people, it's very interesting to listen to them because they're very environmentally sensitive. And that's had a lot to do with what they've talked about, and the fact that they were concerned about the location, expanding green space in the park, breaking up the mass of the building that they're talking about developing, but it's all a concept at this point. And the trick is not to get lost in the weeds when you're talking about these concepts, but the public has problems doing it. You get lost in the weeds. Okay, you want me to quit?
Would you wrap it up? Yeah, please.
All right. Well, at the workshop on Monday, the City Commission talked about the implementation agreement for the Sarasota Performing Arts Center and made comments about it, asked questions about it, and it will be on the agenda next Monday.
21st.
Oh, 21st. Monday's the 7th, sorry. I'll be on the agenda Monday.
Oh,
I'll see you there.
okay. All right.
That's it.
Thank you, Ken. Jamie.
I know we're running a little short on time, so I'll also make it very quick. So October workshop, October 17th, we have a marketing piece go out, unfortunately, the day before the storm, so we're slightly behind schedule where we should be for attendance. We have another piece going out tomorrow, and we do have, I talked to the insurance speaker, Melissa. They think they can work in a piece about how the storms will affect insurance already, so that was another thing we decided we might want to work in. The homelessness town hall is still on December 9th. That marketing piece will go out just before October 17th. We didn't want to kind of cannibalize the two events. So we had a meeting September 11th or 12th. Started putting together some questions, need just to be finalized. Associate events that we come up to us, I don't have any piece from them. And then we had discussed for the event charges for our workshops. Currently it's $10 for members and $15 for non-members. We had discussed, I don't know if this is something we need to vote on or you just need to mention it, but you're probably going to raise the non-member price up by $5 to $20. So it'd be 10 for members and 20 for non-members.
And a lot of people don't know, like the church space is $2,500.
It's $2,500 just for the space. Yeah.
So these events are expensive.
Yeah.
And we know we're, yeah. May I add that Jamie, Kathy, and I have been active in recruiting members, and I think the Cordelia apartments, the new ones, the Lennar apartments at the Quay, I met with them yesterday, was it? And I'm quite certain they're going to join as a member, which would be exciting. BASO is likely to join as a member, and we're working on some other folks. So in addition to kind of watching our expenses, we're really renewals and new members of telling the discus story. One for $250 a year for the Best Buy in town.
Absolutely. That's all I have.
Okay. Green space, nothing. Homeless, Peter, health and safety and homeless.
All right, I was going to do more of a presentation like Ken did, but I don't want to use up that kind of time. Generally, we've been getting a lot of questions, and they're all going to be answered at the forum on December 9th. So that's going to be a good place. I've had the opportunity to talk to the city attorney, Joe Polzak as well, Dee Dee Jones, a number of folks, because we've been getting a lot of questions about HB 1365, which is now 125 over 231 in the state statute, because that's what it created. Basically, and I think what I'm going to do is ask Patrick to put this on the homeless webpage, this two-page explanation from my point of view of not only HB 1365 and the creation of the statute, but also tie it into the SCOTUS decision with regard to grant spend Oregon. The city's in a good place, and it's because we have enforceable ordinances that address these issues. And not only are they enforceable, they are being enforced. Now, I get the question, well, you know, we have these, but nobody pays any attention to them. I would like to point out a couple of things that I would say. Not only with regard to the provisions in House Bill 1365 about designating public areas for sleeping and camping and all those things. We have other ordinances that also work very well too. 2144 is the storage of personal property. And there is an ordinance that addresses that. 2146, trespass warnings, and how do you give them? And then 30-33, obstructing free passage. These all kind of tie in together, and the police know how these tie in together, and they're doing a good job with them. So that what we have is on enforcement. What I'd like to just, this will be the last thing I'm going to say, is that in the calendar year, last calendar year, we had 42 persons seen in the community care courts for lodging out of doors. That didn't just happen. These aren't just a random 42 people. This is the result of the educate, encourage, enforce provision being carried out by the hot teams primarily, with some coordination with the other police officers. 190 summonses issued for lodging out of doors. You know how much time that takes for this team of officers that has 2 enforcement officers, 2 social workers? It takes them hours and hours and hours. So they are being enforced. They are being privileged. I mean, they are being justified through those folks. So I'm going to ask that we put this on the homeless webpage, and you go ahead and pick up and see the rest of what we're doing. Please come, promote the December 9 meeting. We'll have Dee Dee there, and Joe, and Salvation Army, and a lot of good people that can speak to these more expertly than I can.
Thank you. Transportation Committee, Roger is got a storm-related issue he's dealing with, so I guess it's on me. Just the Main Street streetscape design was approved in the budget, or after, because it's a consent item just recently, so that's $2.2 million or something like that to proceed with the design effort. Patrick, can you scroll to one thing that has been discussed amongst some of the board members over the last year or something like that, is a I-ride, for those of you who remember, a kind of an updated kind of concept. Well, why now should we be looking at this? Well, we've got the Main Street redesign. We know merchants are concerned about losing parking if we change to parallel parking. We know we have the downtown master plan about to be updated. We have the economic strategic plan in the process, and there's a workshop on it on the 14th. And as we know, the public may not speak at those. So the reason to kind of look, in my opinion, and I'm looking for concurrence at the board level to kind of get this on the table in a way that makes sense, is we've got a number of factors, the strategic plans, the Main Street growth. I mean, it could be shown to merchants that there are mobility alternatives that help mitigate the parking concern. We have, of course, the continued growth. I mean, we had, there's move-ins at this Cordelia department, apartments are underway. It's 250 units. The one down by the movie theater, there's 400 units there. I think 200 have been CO'd. So, you know, the beat goes on with population growth. And these particular, the quay or down there is just a little bit too far to walk at certain times. So the question is, again, the idea of trying to find a logical way to get this concept back on the table. I think that the time is now. Patrick, if you could just kind of scroll through rather than going through the words.
Could this become part of the update of the downtown master plan?
That's what I don't know enough about. It's certainly part of the.
I think it could be.
Yeah, so I think it is, because we're talking about mobility as a, we're
Exactly.
talking about mobility. And we have to start seeing this in an economic terms of helping sustain, knit together connectivity for the Bay Park, the Rosemary, as we expand as a city to the east.
And you reduce congestion, traffic congestion.
Right, right. And the other thing with these kinds of systems, the models for operating these in Boca Raton, they have it in Coronado, there are 25 different municipalities of varying sizes that are using this, the technology of the app and running these and the models to make them work financially is getting more and more refined. So again, I think it would be, I've met with Wayne Appleby, the Director of Economic Development, and shared this with him. And Patrick, if you could just scroll. So this is kind of the vision. Think of the size. That could be a little bigger than that, but playing off the success of the Bay Runner, or the Downtown Runner. I mean, these are just thought joggers to be refined. But I think it's a very interesting concept. It doesn't, from a city standpoint, staff is not actively working on this. So can we help them? Is there a way that we could work with a vendor maybe to do a test, 3-day test to showcase this and see if it gets traction? I fully realize with some in city leadership, leaving or potential commission makeup changes, I hope we don't end up in Never Never Land, but the idea is how can we continue to make progress? And I think another important thing is with the storm, I think we should show to the community and to the country that we're gonna bounce back. We're not gonna sit on our hands because of the storm, whether it be the Performing Arts Center or this, that we're seeing a long-term vision for Sarasota. So I don't know.
I assume, David, that the ad hoc committee, Downtown Master Plan Update Committee, will have public meetings, and we can go and testify to those meetings.
And also in this economic strategic plan, yet however, whoever's doing that, I mean, we've got a lot of plans going on here. And it just seems to me that this is a worthy thing to at least be looked at, and again, our ability on the economic plan to have input is constrained.
We've made some progress. We're chipping away with the breeze, or the Bay Runner, excuse me, and some other things. We're chipping away at the resistance to getting out of your car. And this, we could keep doing it with something like this, pushing for it.
And there is a breeze on demand run by the county.
Right, but it's,
But
math is
it
not
is,
convenient.
and they're looking at doubling the fares. So the question, I mean, there's a political question between the county and the city. Could we pilot something like we did on the Bay Runner incubator? I mean, it eventually gets handled by the county. I mean, I don't know if we care, but want to look at the service. So I personally, this is something I think that is kind of a big idea, and Patrick.
Well, one question would be if you could find a vendor, who can put together the model, the economic model that says, okay, here's what the cost should be for the writers, not a freebie, because I think in the past we showed that people said, yes, I'll pay $2-3, to get from here to downtown. Advertising, seat back, advertising, video, whatever. I mean, that was never really looked at with the previous one. And then what's left over, is there anything that the city would need to do to integrate it within the whole parking program?
So, I mean, there's 1,000 details, but if we can start with the vision of could we put together something that makes economic sense? I think it makes getting to the Bay Park, getting to Selby, you know, we've got needs now. So let me not go into any more detail. I don't know, do we need board concurrence on this? I think we're gonna.
Consensus.
Consensus, yeah, okay. All right, we're gonna move ahead. Zoning committee, Peter, anything in particular from the zoning things?
Well, I mean, we started to talk about the ad hoc committee for the downtown master plan. So you have to apply by October 17th. Have we figured out who? I mean, we should definitely have someone from DSCA because we are the Downtown Community Association. Have we figured out who that candidate?
What we've done, Peter, about a month ago, I wrote Mayor Alpert requesting that one member from DSCA be one of the 9 members. Did is kind of made their case for, they wanted a member. There are criteria identified that would take a while to go in, but we continue, I think, to make the case that it doesn't have to be a DSCA board member, but in the DSCA family.
Right, but we have to apply.
Yeah, individuals have to apply.
Well,
Peter,
yeah,
Peter,
individual
I think
from
what we tried to
DSCA.
do is we realized that this should be an individual person's decision, and I think we're gonna have several people from this board who will go through the application process.
Oh, okay.
And as it begins to get narrowed down, then I think it's appropriate for the organization to determine how we're going to promote our DSCA member. So, but I think we decided to let it take its course and let the city commissioners get through their interview process and do their selection. It would be fine if you wanted to, write a little note to the city commissioners encouraging them to strongly consider a DSCA member and strongly consider one of our board members who applies.
So I'll circulate the letter I sent the mayor a month or so ago, and if we decide we want to send a reminder, we can end up doing it. Other things, Peter, on?
Well, I mean, there's just a bunch of road vacations, proffer removals that are moving down the pike. And I think a number of us who are working on some of the zoning issues are suggesting to the planning board and I guess ultimately the city commission that you don't want to give up right-of-ways or remove existing proffers without a substantial public benefit. And I think we achieved that with the proffer removal on lots near the Encore, which is, between Fruitville and 4th, just east of the Tamiami Trail. So anyway, there's just so many adjustments that people want, whether it's the Miramar that the owner wants to go 18 floors instead of 10, that changes classification from downtown core to Bayfront, etc. And I don't know that as an organization, we're opposed to that. We just want to make sure there's a good public benefit that arise from those, changes to the zoning for the interests of a private developer.
I do have an update on the alley vacation matter. This is the Toasted Mango and the derelict motel area, said to be a 260 unit condo project approximately, in that alley vacation. That is to be coming to the DRC November 4th. And of course, we'll be seeing, again, there is a public benefit test to that alley vacation. So we'll be watching what the developer, we have had some dialogue, but there needs to be more involvement. On the 1260 Palm Obsidian project, decision was to have been October 2nd.
Right.
Was, and so unless something's happened while we've been in this meeting, somebody could mention, I can check out public access email, but I don't know. And then the new rooftop, going back, we have potential banditos. We've got one called the Warren, where the fit to run on the corner of by 5 Points with an outdoor component. And the big ones are a couple at the play coming. So if there was a time to think about what makes sense, get everybody talking, it's now. Bay Park Conservancy, Bob, do you have anything?
Ken kind of stole the thunder a bit. Obviously, a lot of it has to do with all that's going on with the Performing Arts Center. So we had a meeting on Monday that was advantageous as far as showing what pianos grew up with, which is pretty spectacular. So that, of course, the project on dredging the inlets still progressing, and recovery a little bit from the storm. So much where we're at. CCNA, the most recent information is they held a candidates forum last weekend. Conversation went on. A couple of the commission candidates did not participate, but I think it was interesting. It was videoed. And coming up, the RDA is going to have a candidates forum on October 15th. I think that's worth for the District 1 and 2 candidates. On the Rosemary District Association, ribbon cutting was today. It only took 6 years or whatever it was, but it was a great turnout. Must have been 150 people, and we're really happy that it's open.
And Mayor Albert cut the ribbon.
Mayor Ratch, yep. And we had a bunch of ribbon cutting. So thanks to the commission and everybody who made that happen. A little sausage making along the way, but we got it done, and it's actually a very pleasant place. Jamie, take away with some of our.
Well, some, we only have one, but they can be the star of the show. Tony and Alyssa, hopefully you guys will all through the storm. Berkey Yacht Club.
Sure. I thank you for allowing us to speak very quickly, I promise. Dee Dee Moore is our chair of marketing. I'm the vice commodore at the club. A couple things going on. We're very excited as we progress towards our complete club rebuild starting in May 2025. As you can imagine, lots of moving parts, things are progressing through the city with permits and what have you, and things are looking very positive, lots of enthusiasm, not only within our membership, but also within the Bird Key community itself. Talking, I was at an HOA meeting this morning with them as well. The other thing that's really quite interesting is Mike Modrick, the host of Discovering the Suncoast, ABC7 meteorologist, is finalizing a segment on the history of Bird Key and the history of the Bird Key Yacht Club from the very, very beginning in 1905. It was first spotted by the Worcester family who ended up building Edson Castle on there. So that's scheduled to air towards the end of October. I'll definitely keep you advised. Should be quite an interesting historical piece just in the general Sarasota community. So thank you very much.
Did you get any help in your remodeling effort this week?
On our
remodeling effort?
For Mother Nature.
Oh,
Mother Nature
Just
helped
a
you out?
touch, yeah, it's funny, we actually we had zero damage at all, which was amazing. The water had come up from the bay to our aft deck, which is about a foot or so below our window levels. And that was it. Our team is tremendous in terms of preparing and estimating what needs to be done for it, but we were spared, we were very thankful, and hopefully that it won't happen too many times more often.
And my extreme apologies, I think Patricia sneaking.
You couldn't. I was sneaking in at the last minute. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Patricia Stabler, Appraisal and Consulting. As usual, Sears, Reserve Studies, Appraisals, you name it. Now, after what happened, we will be concentrating on FEMA. So our phones are running hot. All the islands up to Clearwater, FEMA problems, over FEMA problems, because every building which is in the flood zone and wants to be rebuilt, repaired, probably will need 50%. But that is not affecting you. I have some news I want to share with you about insurance. I talked to a couple of agents, and the estimate is that about 85% of all the damage is flood, which means for us, as insured, that it will not be that huge rate hike again we saw after Ian. This is taxpayer money. FEMA is taxpayer. And FEMA is already 300 million, billion, or whatever in the red. So it will be, I can't even imagine. But even everything with storm surge, FEMA. It is not wind. So of course we have big wind events at the landfall, Steinhatchee, Cedar Key, and the adjusters will have to figure out what goes to flood, what goes to wind. But in essence, most of the damage is flood and will not impact the reinsurers. And the reinsurers are the ones who are pushing for the rate increases so that carriers leave the state. So fingers crossed this will not happen. That's all I have to say today. And I think we're all incredibly lucky we dodged the bullet. Really, really bad. I mean, I was sitting in my house, nothing, out amenity, 50, 60 degrees of wind, a little bit of trees and leaves, and that's it. So we are really lucky. The islands are in a bad condition. And up north, even worse, and siesta.
Thank you.
Can I just add one quick thing I forgot, David? I was at the preview opening for the Purple Orchid Show at Selby Gardens last night. And Jennifer mentioned about phase 2 of their project that they hope to start around the end of 2025, and she's calling it the Crystal Palace.
Wonderful, okay. Are there any comments from member reps? Jim, have you got anything you had from Mark or anybody else?
No, but I would just thank Bob for his years of service. That's a very important position and has to be artfully handled, and you have done very well.
I will never forget, Bob, how well you write briefs. And the one that stuck out in my mind was the one about the boat basin in response to Phil Dasher's complaint about somebody sailing through his water. Do you remember that?
I think I've written more than one about that.
It was wonderful. It was in depth and it was clear, and there were no questions because it was so obviously correct. It was about navigation in navigable waters.
Let me just in closing say, it's incredibly difficult to go and find the Goldilocks amount of information to convey. Behind this cover story, there's a lot, just tremendous
going on. Thank you all for help in trying to track it all. There's a lot going on, and I think DSCA collectively is making a difference. And some of this continues to have the ears of a lot of city staff and commissioners, I hope, on most occasions. But we sure appreciate it, and we continue to want to make a positive impact on our city. So with that said, our next meeting is November 6th, and Patrick, I don't think we haven't got confirmation yet. Okay, but we're kind of aiming for a climate change oriented environmental kind of speaker. For December, we have the Urbanite Theater, and remember that's our holiday party is right after the December or whatever.
What about Bob Bunting as the speaker? Do you know who he is?
Yes, this is guy who works with Bob. We're Kirby, so it's the same organization, right?
Okay.
So it
Bob
was
is-
not available.
Bob is wonderful.
I know.
Okay, any final comments? Other than that, let's call ourselves adjourned and have a glass of wine.
Okay.